This is a continuation of Part 3, Chapter 2, The Resurrection of People and Eternal Life from Now On is Our Reality, by Grigori Grabovoi. I'm Stephen Walters. I am a real human being. This is my real human voice. This is not AI. Now we proceed to the principles of the resurrection and the analysis of science I have just made. This is Grigori Grabovoi. I will help us all well understand a number of important aspects pertaining to these principles. For the principles of the resurrection are the example of science, true science. First of all, I would like to say the following. Usually, principles imply something fixed, something unchangeable, and this is not accidental. We all have an example of familiar to all orthodox science, which deals with fixed, unchanging laws. The analysis of these laws and obtaining consequences of them are conducted by means of the mathematical apparatus that never changes, with fixed formulas. Such fixing of the key positions is inculcated since childhood, just based on the perception of the world, typically for an ordinary wakeful consciousness. However, we have already seen that real science does not limit itself to plain statement of reality. For reality, as we know from the first paragraph of this chapter, in actuality is very changeable. I can, Grigori Grabovoi writing this, for example, materialize and dematerialize objects, and therefore the true science, the real science, utilizes a flexible, changeable mathematical apparatus. Basic laws may change as well. Similarly, each of the resurrection principle may be modified with the course of time. This is consistent with the main characteristic of real life, which is its continuous development. Other attributes of real science that we have discovered are present here as well. Here too, the existing principles are aimed towards obtaining the necessary result, but provided the absence of any destruction and provided the full control of every intermediate stage. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the division of the principles into 4 levels and their arrangement into 4 respective sections should not be perceived statically. The overall approach must be dynamic, flexible. The implementation of these principles by people may be, for example, in such a way that a principle from Section 4 can be more effective than a principle from Section 1. It would seem that if the principle refers to the first level, it deems to be more effective. However, in actuality, it can be otherwise. The situation may turn out to be more complex. It may happen, for example, that a person read the principles of Section 4, but he did not read the principles of Section 1. But they all are in the information field, and he can perceive them implicitly and thus in fact know them. And though formally the principles of Section 1 are indeed generally more important, nevertheless, since their effect on a person depends on specific conditions, a specific situation, their general collective effect on a person is more significant. We must bear in mind that altogether, in aggregate, these principles represent a living organism. And you, being a living organism too, may have situations when, let's say, a hand at some point is more important for you than your head. But at the same time, nobody is going to deny the importance of the head. So, the most important here is the general arrangement of the principles and their collective interaction with a person. These principles are, in fact, a system of actions aimed at the concrete solutions of the issue of our life. The first principle in this section states, aspiration of God and man for unity within recreation and reunion results in materialization and resurrection. 3.1. As I've already said in the beginning of this chapter, today a new stage in the evolution of man has come. The former path of development, when one has to give up her physical body, has completely exhausted itself. It does not meet the demands of the present day. Man is taking a new path, a path of non-dying, a path of immortality, and on this path, his spiritual core. His spiritual base begins to show itself much more clearly, and a deeper realization of the verity that man has been created in God's own image and likeness begins to take place. The resurrection, that is, the regeneration, the restoration of those who are gone, and their desire, just as the desire of the living, for unity with the Creator, reflect the true nature of man. The resurrection of people, like nothing else, proves that life has a spiritual base. Concentration by man of his own consciousness might result in a radical change of the world's structure. 3.2. This principle is closely linked to the principle 1.4. Please notice that the word concentration has simultaneously two meanings here. One meaning of the word is well known, especially to those who has practiced, let's say, such a discipline as yoga. Some spiritual disciplines explain how, by means of concentration of consciousness, for example, on a certain organ of the body, the state of this organ can be changed, restored to health. The other meaning of the word concentration, which is implied here as well, is the following. As I've already said in part 1 of this chapter, consciousness is the structure which allows the soul to control the body, and in a wide sense of the word, consciousness is the structure which unites spiritual and physical matter. In this context, concentration of consciousness means its real accumulation. We may draw, but very roughly, an analogy with computers, just to emphasize the idea. Let's remember what was used to perform calculations at the dawn of the computer era. The first electronic computers occupied several rooms, but a modern computer fits on a palm and is much more powerful. It is clear that if a certain device initially occupied several rooms and now fits on a palm, then we may say that all those structures that make this device a computer are concentrated in a small volume of this device. The same applies to consciousness, which, as we know, also represents a certain structure. As a person works on self-perfection, as he develops, as he evolves spiritually, the greater and greater concentration of his consciousness is achieved. That is the second meaning of the word concentration used in the formulation of this principle. The second meaning of the word concentration is of particular importance. The concentration of consciousness means here, in actuality, an increase of the information compactness, an increase of the mass data in a volume unit. Such consciousness, concentration, may have far-reaching consequences. When in the process of a person's evolution, his consciousness concentration in a certain volume reaches a certain value, this volume begins to submit to the person, begins to submit to his consciousness. In a situation like this, the world structure changes, and now it is not the world that will determine a person's structure, but the person himself will set the tone. As soon as the concentration of consciousness becomes greater than the substance concentration, for example, of the aforementioned computer, man will become inaccessible. He will be then indestructible. Man's thoughts, words, actions will become a primary element, and machines, buildings, planets, all these and other material objects will be a secondary element, and it will be then the next level of existence. And it is exactly to this purpose that I communicate knowledge, the new knowledge, so that people having mastered this new system of knowledge should be able to start controlling worlds. It will be a completely different level of existence. There will be no place for decay. Completely different processes will be taking place there. These processes will be the ones of recommencement of worlds. That is, the processes when the eternal gives birth to the eternal, when the status of eternity is translated into the status of next eternity. In this case, we have an overconcentration of consciousness, which immensely increases the rate of information exchange, so that as a result, completely different structures appear. The structures of the highest consciousness, the structures of the highest life. At this level, for example, a thought is now an action, and an action is a thought. For this level, for this word structure, for these worlds, an object and an action, physical and spiritual, are the same. This is the radical change in the world structure that this principle talks about, and a person can achieve it through the concentration of his own consciousness. Physical body is always a part of the soul. 3.3. Both theoretically and practically, man can be regarded as a structure of consciousness that has a body shell. 3.4. The wording of the last principle, as it is given here, was used in the first section of the previous chapter, where the case of Rusinov's resurrection was examined. Thanks to the stories of those who personally visited the other side and then came back into our world again, it is possible to have first-hand detailed information concerning their feelings and sensations at the moment of their biological death and after, and how they perceived our world from there. Thus, that sealed book, that mystery that has always existed in respect of biological death, now due to the resurrection, finally ceases to be a great enigma, and the veracity, astounding in its simplicity, uncloses before us. And the core of this truth, the core of this discovery, is that now, when the cover has been pulled off from this great mystery, suddenly it became clear that death, as it turns out, is not needed at all. More than that, as we have ascertained a little earlier, it has become an obstacle to a person's further development, and that is why immortality is now on the agenda. As for Ruslinov's particular experience, he gave a detailed description of the stages his consciousness went through following his departure. During the first month, his consciousness was as if contracting. Ruslinov felt that his consciousness was entering a certain single point somewhere around his head. He distinctly felt his consciousness being in that point. During the first 2 to 3 weeks, Ruslinov made attempts to restore his body to the level of ordinary life. However, then his consciousness shifted to trying to understand, trying to grasp this new stage in his state, the state when his body was undergoing decomposition. And at the same time, his consciousness was fully aware that his soul was moving towards God's light. There, consciousness and the soul became one. It should be noted that the stages consciousness goes through after the biological death are quite different for different people. This process is exclusively individual, but I will not go into further details, for we already know that this path, the path of spiritual development through giving up a physical body, will soon become a thing of the past, will soon become history. Times have changed. Nowadays, nobody would want to use a cart when a car or an airliner is available. In relation to these two considered principles, a few words may be said as to an interesting practice of ancient magicians. The information about it can still be found to this day, though it is extant mostly in fairy tales. The principles in question mean that it is possible to build a physical body around the soul, but it is not necessarily must be a human body that can be built, but a body of an animal as well. This is the very practice I have in mind, and which ancient magicians were the masters of. They would create a body of an animal, enter it, and then come back. We read about it in our childhood. I will emphasize, however, that in order to be able to transfer oneself into animals in such a manner, a fairly fast information processing ability in the structure of the spirit is necessary. At the level of creation of information, connections, no object overlaps with any other external object, including itself. The principle of resurrection of man, or the principle of resurrection of any object, is in the overlapping of initial information about the object with the developing information about itself in the area of the effect relations, which appear in the course of creation of information. 3.5. For gaining a true insight into this principle, different aspects of the world at the information level ought to be understood. The informational approach, I think, this is Grigori Grabovoi saying this, will be considered in one of the books of this series, but now I will confine myself just to certain explanations. This principle virtually states that in the state of ordinary wakeful consciousness, a person can resurrect based on overlapping of his initial state of consciousness with the next state of his consciousness, present at the moment of the resurrection. For a person in an ordinary state of consciousness at the information level of the initial state, no object in principle can overlap with any external object or itself. The shift to a higher state of consciousness is necessary in order to make the overlapping of the initial information about an object with the developing information about this object possible, which gives the resurrection of a person, or the restoration, the regeneration of any object in general. Recall the example with a flower, given in the introduction. In an ordinary state of consciousness, a person is not able in principle to comprehend the essence of a flower, as well as of any other creation. He may observe the flower as much as desired, but he won't be able to penetrate its mystery, the mystery of its existence. However, in a higher state of consciousness, a person is able to become one with the flower. On the language of this principle, a sort of overlapping with the flower may take place. And when the person becomes one with the flower, becomes indistinguishable from it, then the comprehension of the essence of the flower comes. The mystery opens up. The true path towards comprehension of the world is precisely in raising the level of the state of consciousness. It is the higher states of consciousness that pose the golden key that opens the gates of the world. The higher states of consciousness will lead to elimination of any destruction. The matter is that in a certain state of consciousness, each world element is eternal. Therefore, when the majority of the collective consciousness has achieved such a level, any destruction will be impossible. The system of spiritual views of that one who practices resurrection is exactly the principle of society organization at the subsequent stages of its development. 3.6. Principle 2.1, which we discussed earlier, states that the resurrection is based on revealing the eternal in man. Thus, the one practicing the resurrection deals with eternity. In this connection, at the subsequent stages of its evolution, the society will be built on the principles of eternity, which is in line with the designs and ideas of the Creator. These designs and ideas of the Creator are implemented in practice by the one who practices the resurrection. Distant objects of reality are what is approached for the resurrected and removed for the living. 3.7. First, I will explain what this principle is about, and then restate it for better understanding. In this principle, one and the same objects, one and the same facts are viewed from two perspectives, from the viewpoint of the living one and from the viewpoint of the resurrected one. If an object is being moved farther and farther away from the living one, thus increasing the distance between them, then for him, it will be becoming a farther and farther moved away distant object. However, of all the concepts associated with remoteness, a person's being on the other side is the most remote. For example, when the distance increases, one can still speak of certain gradations, but when a person departs with respect to the living one, there are no gradations whatsoever. However, this remoteness, perceived as such by the living one, for the resurrected one turns to be brought closer. That's what is stated in the formulation of the principle. By the way, the fact that what is perceived as distant by the living one turns to be brought closer for the resurrected one can be discovered during the first month after the resurrection. For example, by examining the cell structure. Cytologic analysis, that is, cell analysis, allows finding out that the cell structure during this period may be somewhat different. For example, in terms of the position of the cell's elements in relation to the nucleus, the cell microelements of the resurrected one may be positioned at a greater distance from the nucleus, and the orientation of their structures is still different compared to all these cell characteristics of the living. In connection with the aforesaid, the principle at issue may be restated as follows. The resurrected one, as a control element, has a structure, which he has gone through, which he has acquired. For example, through his departure, however, this control element in reality does not prove to be effective. Quite the opposite. In order to live a normal life among the living, much work has to be done by the resurrected one as to reacquire the characteristics of the living and to become one of them in all respects. This principle may be looked at from a somewhat different angle. In terms of action and development, the resurrected one perceives reality, especially in the beginning. So that eternity appears to be a flexible structure, while for the living one, eternity is an absolute structure. It is the transition through the departure and return structure that leads to the perception of eternity by the resurrected one as a dynamic and flexible structure. And due to this, a problem of adaptation to the world of the living arises. The necessity to properly attune various perception elements so that eternity changes and becomes static and absolute. What I've just said, this is Grigori Grabovoi, is in fact one more formulation of this principle. Due to its importance, I will repeat it again more laconically. In the beginning, after the resurrection, the resurrected perceives eternity as a dynamic structure. In order to become adapted to the living, he has to regain their perception. The perception which reflects the absolute reality, namely the static structure of eternity. The circumstance that, in this regard, the resurrected has a distorted picture of reality comes from the fact that during the resurrection, out of the overall picture, he singles out only one element, the resurrection phase, and as a result, he sees only one of the aspects of eternity's statics. The statics, which for those who did not experience death, is an absolute reality, and which for them reflects an absolute character of eternity. This principle, pointing out the significant differences in the beginning between the resurrected and the living, virtually speaks of the necessity to assist them in their adaptation process. And I do not mean only social adaptation. The resurrected experience cell rearrangement as well. Their structure somewhat changes. Certain atoms move to the proper place into the proper structure. As a result of these processes, the elements of the separation from the living, as I was speaking about, gradually fade and become insignificant for the further evolution of the resurrected one. That is why special concentration methods should be given to the resurrected one to facilitate the said processes in the body. Now, here is one more formulation of the principle at issue. The resurrected has a structure of consciousness which was formed, among other things, also due to the departure. And for that reason, this new structure needs to be adopted to the structure of the consciousness of the living, of those who did not experience death, so that after some time, their structures of consciousness should not in fact differ from each other. The resurrected absolutizes space and details time. During the initial period, time is discrete for him, while for the living one, time is continuous. 3.8. In what sense does the resurrected absolutize space? He absolutizes space as a structure based on which anything is possible. For example, both the body's decomposition and its being assembled back again. Absolutization of space by the structured one is also due, as we have discussed earlier, to the tie to a certain place. The living one doesn't absolutize space due to the fact that he has never been tied to a certain place. And since he has never been tied to any particular place, since he has never had such a tie, he could not apply it to the eternal structure. It is different for the resurrected one. For some time, he was tied to the space in a certain point, in a certain area. That specific segment was a structure of eternity for him. That is why that stage of his, during which he was a gone one, absolutizes space for him as a structure of eternity, though in actuality, the situation is quite different. Vita lecit, we know that space can be controlled, let's say by means of a thought impulse, or it may even be changed at all, as I have explained, through the collective consciousness. As a matter of fact, the resurrected understands that space is changeable, transformable. It is even natural for him. It is just obvious for him, because he himself has just been transformed in the same way. Nevertheless, both the gone one and at first the resurrected one absolutize space, make it absolute, that is, impart uniform characteristics to space for the perception process. As a practical consequence, it follows that man can be resurrected in any place in space, wherever you wish, regardless of time. One may notice that such space perception, generally speaking, persists in the consciousness of the resurrected one. However, gradually he stops noticing it, regarding it as unessential. Now, concerning time, in what sense does the resurrected one disaggregate time in the initial period? In the initial period, the resurrected disaggregates time in the sense that each element of the world is in different time for him. It can be understood if we look at the process of assembling the body. During the resurrection, when the body was being assembled at the cellular level, each cell was being restored at a different time. The difference in time could only be small fractions of a second, and yet different cells were being restored at a different time. Here, a principal difference may be seen from the case when a person is born normally. In normal birth, the body is also formed, but it is formed monolithically, synchronously. There is no asynchronism which is observed in the resurrection. As I have said, during the resurrection, some cells are formed faster, some slower, and a person feels it. He perceives it, as if the flow of time is different for different objects. If, for example, he sees a plant before him, he may think that time flows, let's say, faster than for any other object. So, time disaggregation by the resurrected one is due to the fact that for him, time in the beginning flows differently in different objects, in different processes. It leads to the time being as if discontinuous for the resurrected. One kind of time is here, another kind of time is there, which results in time being at first discrete for him. The discreteness, the discontinuity of time, is therefore one of its disaggregation aspects. This time discreteness, or its disaggregation in general, pertains to the problem of perception. Logically, it is clear that the world can be perceived in quite different ways. The consciousness of the resurrected one has gone through the phase where any views are present, where time is both continuous and discontinuous. Thus, when in the beginning the resurrected observes that time is different in different phenomena, he, in fact, just observes a discrete picture of the world. Special courses may help the resurrected one restore his time perception, make it similar to the one of the living, within quite a short time, 2 weeks at the most. Particularly, the discreteness and the aggregation of time are seen when a human body is assembled from the ash. In this case, a human body is disintegrated into small particles, the ash particles, and the ash may happen to be widely scattered, and some particles may happen to be in totally different surroundings. The ash particles are further broken down into microelements, and for the scattered particles, the collective consciousness of a sort emerges, which controls each element of the ashes. And each element has its own flow of time, its own rate at which time passes for it. A person in this case is as if scattered, since all his particles are scattered. However, even in such a state, he clearly understands that he is the same soul, the same consciousness, the same person, that his present state will be followed by the resurrection, because the soul just must resurrect the body in order to have additional opportunities for a faster growth. Compare, if a person is sick, he is out of shape, he is not feeling very well, because a sickness is a departure from the norm. And the gone one perfectly understands that he, being in a scattered state, is far from the normal state. Thus, he tries to bring the norm, which is his natural status, back. Compared to the gone one, the living one is in incomprehensibly more advantageous position. He doesn't have to assemble anything. He can devote all his efforts and time to whatever needs to be done. And since he has a physical body, he has additional capabilities. For example, he may pick up a receiver and dial a number when the gone one is devoid of such a capability. One must clearly understand altogether that it is no joy to be on the other side. And furthermore, in the future, one will have to assemble her body anyway. So there's no need to waste time. As I have said, the reincarnation path for the gone is becoming a thing of the past. Now, the resurrection is becoming the primary path, and all the gone ones will resurrect regardless. At present, in this respect, they have a narrow choice. There's also another variant of development of events, when the number of the resurrected one will reach a certain specific quantity. We may say nominal mass. Then all the rest will resurrect all at once. This process of the resurrection is already underway. I think it is worth mentioning that space and time perception depends on the level of the state of consciousness, on the level of the spirit. If a person is not enlightened, he perceives space and time at the current moment. But if a person possesses a higher level of the state of consciousness, he can perceive the world by means of clairvoyance. In that case, he is able to see diverse spaces and diverse time, and a different kind of spaces and a different kind of time at all. Specifically, for example, absence of time. So, the concepts of space and time are individual for each person, and everything is determined by the level of the state of consciousness.